when I retired, I was very, I was glad to retire, but I thought, well, what am I going to do with my spare time? And I answered an ad in the paper that said that someone in a civic group in Nashua was looking for school marm. And I thought, for what? And I had passed the District Number 1 school thousands of times, literally. I live off Brook Road. So I passed this schoolhouse thousands of times and found out that they have a program for 4th graders, which you will see today. And they were looking for a new school marm to take up the duties of teaching these 4th graders. So schoolhouses since that day, 5 years ago, almost 6 years ago, have become my passion. I've been cheating on my husband, having an affair with the schoolhouse. So it's been a wonderful experience. I have joined a national organization, actually helped form this national organization called the Country School Association of America, where we encourage people to preserve schoolhouses. I'm on the board of directors now. That's what you get when you volunteer. So we meet annually in the Midwest or in the East. We kind of alternate where we meet nationally, and we get maybe 100 people at these meetings, people who are truly into schoolhouses and the preservation of schoolhouses. So I appreciate that Nashua was way ahead of the curve in saving their schoolhouse, and you will see a lot of that as we talk today. So let's meet the District Number 1 schoolhouse. And you people have seen this schoolhouse. You have passed it a million times. It sits right across the street from CVS in the middle of the Old South Cemetery. The Old South Cemetery has been there since the 1680s. The oldest stone in that cemetery is a lady named Elizabeth Weld, and she was buried there in 1687. It's a fascinating cemetery. It has Revolutionary War heroes. It has a member of the Continental Congress buried there. It has infants buried there. It has 96-year-old people buried there, teenagers, young people. It's a fascinating place to take a walk through history. But the best feature of that cemetery is the District Number 1 schoolhouse. It's got 2 front doors, which many schoolhouses in the day had, because they separated the boys from the girls and they walked into separate doors. And this is the front view of the District Number 1 schoolhouse. It's a little snowy right now, but in season, it's absolutely beautiful. I'm sorry. The next one, you often hear them talk about the Little Red Schoolhouse. Actually, I should tell you a couple of things about the 1841 schoolhouse before I go on. The land that it sits on right next to the cemetery was purchased from a farmer named Campbell who had a farm next door to the cemetery for $75 in 1841. And that piece of land today could be potentially worth billions. But what has preserved that little schoolhouse right there is the fact that it sits right in the middle of this cemetery. So that is the one feature that has allowed it to carry on and not have it knocked down and sold. And so it was built for a total of $629, and they put a blackboard in there, which was newfangled invention in those days, a slate board, and the slate board went up for $1.25. And that slate board is still in the District Number 1 schoolhouse. In 1841, just briefly, there were 6,000 people in the city of Nashua. There were 50 stores, 8 churches, and 9 taverns. Their priorities were in the right place. There were 2 mills, Nashua Manufacturing and the Jackson Mills. They had a post office, which had been in operation since 1803. They had 2 newspapers, and the newspapers were the Nashua Gazette and the New Hampshire Telegraph at the time it was called, now the Nashua Telegraph, so it's been in operation for a very long time. It had 5 selectmen and it had 7 police officers, 3 fire engine companies, 11 schools, like the District Number 1 schoolhouse, 10 doctors, and 7 attorneys. And so that's just a little capsule of what this town would have looked like. Oh, and they had a railroad. The railroad went from Nashua to Boston, Nashua to Lowell, and then Lowell to Boston, and that opened in 1838. So that gives you a little capsule of what was going on when this schoolhouse was built. You often hear of the Little Red Schoolhouse. It's a phrase that you've heard probably all your life, the Little Red Schoolhouse. And all around the country, you'll find little red schoolhouses. And we've got a few that are even local. If you go up to Tucker Mountain Road in East Andover, New Hampshire, this has been preserved by a family who lives on Tucker Mountain Road, and you'll see the interior of that one shortly. And these are only there because of preservationists. This is the Redstone School at the Wayside Sudbury Inn. Have you been to the Wayside Inn? Well, you can go there, and in the summertime you can actually go inside this school. And this is the Mary Had a Little Lamb schoolhouse. This is the schoolhouse where the actual poem, Mary Had a Little Lamb, was conceived from a visit to a schoolhouse by a little girl and her lamb. Now, you'll probably read somewhere along the way that Sarah Josepha Hale wrote Mary Had a Little Lamb, but apparently, if you do research, it was written by a minister. She published it in Godey's Ladies magazine, and she added to the poem, but the original 12 lines were actually written by a minister who heard the story of Mary's little lamb going to this schoolhouse. And this schoolhouse was preserved by Henry Ford when he actually owned the Wayside Inn back in the 30s, I believe. And then right around the corner from us is the Sarah Ting Winslow School, and that's used by the Dunstable Historical Society. And it sits on a 4-acre parcel. The school was actually moved from Tingsboro. And
that's my friend's, she used to have her shop.
Oh, yes.
A quilt shop in the
A quilt shop was in there.
And
okay.
I was just with her the other day. I hate to interrupt you, but she was just talking to me about this.
Mm-hmm.
Part of her parents' house from the early 1900s, the end of the house was actually moved next to this, the little white part of the building.
And then they've taken that down since and maintained it as a schoolhouse. This land was donated by the Larder family in Dunstable and moved there. But they use it for the Strawberry Festival, and they use it for art presentations. Now, the Head School in Hooksett just rededicated last September, and now they've opened a program very similar to ours, and they're preserved also because they happen to be in the middle of a cemetery. And you probably say, well, why were schoolhouses built in the middle of cemeteries? Well, actually, at one time, there was more than likely there was a meeting house on that property, right there where the footprint of the schoolhouse is. That was the footprint of the meeting house, sometimes 2 or 3 meeting houses in a row. And they used to bury the parishioners right in the churchyard. And the District Number 1 schoolhouse in Chelmsford, Massachusetts is right off the center. And that one is the District Number 1 from 1802, so they were way ahead of the curve on building schoolhouses, and a very substantial one. You can go as far south as Palm Beach, Florida, and find a little red schoolhouse that's preserved. And you'll note the great big doors. I photographed this one about a year ago. You'll notice the great big doors on the front, and they used to open those doors and let the ocean breezes come in. Because this too is on prime property on Palm Beach. The ocean is behind the school. It is magnificent. And they've preserved it. And then if you go to Brookline, you can see the Putterham School. So all these little red schools, well, why were they red? They were red because the cheapest paint was made from an iron oxide red pigment. And so they would paint the barns of New England, they would paint them red, and they would have leftover paint, and they would paint the schoolhouses red. They were once unpainted. So then they started switching over to white, and that's because lead paint was invented. And lead paint became as cheap as iron oxide paint, so people started painting their houses white. When they painted their houses white, they said, well, our schoolhouses should not look like barns, they should look like houses. And they started once again to paint, they started painting their houses white. So you'll see the schoolhouses now start to become white. And so this one you can see in Salem, New Hampshire. They have refurbished the whole school in and out. Indian Stream Schoolhouse in Pittsburgh, New Hampshire, way, way up, almost by the Canadian border, just rededicated about a year ago due to the efforts of volunteers. And you can go around the country and see these restored schoolhouses. And this is the one in Center Sandwich. Every year, people who went to this schoolhouse have a reunion. And I went to the reunion about 2 years ago and met all the lovely people who attended the schoolhouse. Haverhill, New Hampshire has a 2-story white schoolhouse. This is a beauty. I have not been inside this one, but I'm hoping to get back there one day. And when you're driving down the road, you can tell they're very characteristically built, so you can recognize your one-room schoolhouses. The one in Burlington, Massachusetts is used as a museum. And this strange-looking schoolhouse I photographed just about 3 months ago. It's actually a 2-room schoolhouse, but it's one of the most unique designs I've ever seen. And they happen to be closed for the season, but white. And then we have the Blue School in Landaff, New Hampshire. They weren't tied to any particular color. They didn't have to be one or the other. So Landaff decided they would be different and painted their school blue. It's one of the 3 schoolhouses of New Hampshire that is still used as a public 1-room schoolhouse. Yes. And it's always on the brink of closing. So as I speak now, I believe it's still open. And another blue schoolhouse in New Jersey. And the green school didn't come out so beautifully on this, but it is green. It's green here, but it's black and white there. It's actually green. And then they started painting them any color that they desired, even a pink schoolhouse. And I read the story of a pink schoolhouse where it was red at one time, and the town father said, we don't want a red schoolhouse, we want it white. They could only afford 1 coat of paint, slapped it on, and the schoolhouse became pink. And so they ended up with a pink schoolhouse and said, leave it. Okay, and some were unpainted, and many around the country were logged. They built with local materials, of course. Whatever the cheapest, they built with. And they built with the local stone in some places also. And if you were really on the cutting edge, you had an 8-square schoolhouse. They said that the best design for a schoolhouse would be 8 square so that the children could sit in each of those sides and the teacher would operate from the middle. Then she could just turn to the various classes as she taught. And so there still are some 8-square schoolhouses left in the country, and this one has been refurbished. So call them what you may. As you read about 1-room schoolhouses, some people have some very lofty names for what they call these schoolhouses. And these are some of the names or titles that I've come across as I've been reading about 1-room schools. Lonely Little House of Scholarship, a Seminary of Letters, because they were important to the growth of the country, and they felt that they were pillars of the Republic. But if you really want to get down to the names, this is what they named the schools. And so these are some of the cutest ones that I took out of a book that was listing schoolhouses, some of the best names. And they all had a reason for naming them, like the Last Chance School. They fought for 7 months. I read the story about the town fathers fighting over the name of the schoolhouse. And so someone put the gavel down at the last meeting and said, this is your last chance to name that schoolhouse. And so it became the Last Chance Schoolhouse because they were tired of arguing. The Good Intent School, right. So schools were often named after the townships in which they were built, the benefactors who may have given the land or the money to build the schoolhouse, famous Americans like George Washington Schoolhouse or Ulysses S. Grant Schoolhouse, Animals and Nature. Characteristics of the schoolhouse could be a part of the name, or just district numbers like they did in early Nashua. They named them district number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. And eventually they started naming the schools when they got bigger. And we have a very nostalgic idea about what it was to go to a 1-room schoolhouse. Winslow Homer was an artist who depicted the 1-room school in many of his pieces of art, and he would publish them in Harper's Weekly. And the reason he was so intent on the 1-room schoolhouse story was because he was in love with the schoolhouse teacher at one time. And from the story, it appears that it was unrequited love, and then he went on to other subjects. But Winslow Homer painted the inside of a schoolhouse. And early schoolhouses were built this way, where the desks were slabs around the outside of the room, and the teacher operated from the middle. And the littlest scholars, called the abacadarians because all they did all day was abacadafa. They did the sounds of the letters, so they called them abacadarians, sat closest to the teacher. And she always hoped they would fall asleep so that she could move on to the other scholars. And this is a picture I'm sure you're all familiar with, Snap the Whip, to depict the schoolyard games of the children. And if you look at the history of this picture, it actually has some relationship to the Civil War. If you read why he painted this the way it was, the Union coming back together, and there's a big explanation for this picture. But this was he depicted the teacher, and he depicted noon recess. What happens to you if you do not behave with this particular teacher? And so people would see his artwork, and they would send in poetry to go with his artwork. And I found a little piece of one of the poems that went with this one. While you this recess hour must spend on study bench without a friend, and all the friends are outside the schoolhouse having a wonderful time. Well, the question is, are there still any schoolhouses around? Where have all the schoolhouses gone? If there were 200,000, over 200,000 of them in 1913, and only 6 years later you can see the number dwindling, what happened to the one-room school? It had to do with population increases, of course, and it had to do with consolidation. They called it consolidation. That was to take a number of districts and glue them back together to form larger districts, and that was when they started busing children from the countryside to larger schools. And so the schoolhouses started to fall away. What happened to those schoolhouses? They were sold off and used as storage units. They became corn cribs and grain bins and pigsties. They were burned by local fire departments for practice. They were sold off and people turned them into homes. And as we go along here, I'll show you some of the conversions. But in New Hampshire, there still are 3 one-room schoolhouses that are still in operation, mainly for the younger grades, maybe K through 3, while the older children are bused. And those are the Blue School that I already showed you, the Croydon Village School, and the Alexandria Village School, and the towns that they're in. Yes?
Where is Croydon?
Croydon, they're up, one of them is up off 89. They're all north of here. They're all a good 90 minutes north of here, these towns. And the Blue School I've visited, the other 2 schools I have not, so these are not my photographs. But just to show you what 3 are still operating. But another question, who still builds one-room schoolhouses? This is a very interesting concept. The Amish and the Mennonites in this country still build one-room schoolhouses, and they're very, very characteristic. You can see them dotting the landscape when you go through Pennsylvania and Iowa and Illinois, believe it or not. And they're very, very characteristic. Some of them have been purchased by local public schools, and they've turned them into Amish schools, or they build them themselves from scratch, brand new. And so we actually were allowed to visit these schools, and they let us take photographs as long as there were no children in there and as long as the teachers had left the building. So the next picture is what it looks like on the inside of this schoolhouse. It looks as if you're stepping back into the 1950s. But they make do, and they have one teacher who is not trained because their children only go to school up into the 8th grade. And the teacher is called to be a teacher. They ask someone if they would like to be a teacher. And if, like in the olden days, if they were good readers and they could cipher and do arithmetic and know some geography and had an interest in teaching, they could be called to teaching. There's no formal training in the Amish community. And you say, well, how do they get around the law and only go to the 8th grade? It's because they've made a deal with the federal government that if they put their children past the 8th grade into building trades, to build houses, to make furniture, to restore wagons, to restore pianos. They teach them this on their own time, and they say that that's their vocational education, and that's how they get around federal laws. It's very, very interesting. It's a whole presentation in itself. And so you can see that the inside of the school, there are their bonnets all neatly put on the side of the classroom. And they do come to school in a horse and buggy, believe me, they do. And the pony shed is out the back of the schoolhouse, as is the privy. And you find them in the middle of cornfields and on the corner of someone's farm, but they are there. And this lovely man allowed us to come in and photograph his school. So you really feel as if you're stepping back into history, and this school is an Amish school that just happened to be out of session for the summer. But that's the way it looks in real time. So what have people done with their one-room schoolhouses? They've turned them into historical societies. The historical societies move in and they hold their meetings there sometimes. This one is in Dublin Center. If you drive up Route 101, it's on the right in Dublin Center. And the museum, of course, in Burlington, Massachusetts. And then some people have turned them into homes. And they allowed us inside this home out in Iowa. It's absolutely pristine. The old floors are there. They've left some of the chalkboards up and they've decorated around it. It's magnificent. And it's all on one floor. And then this one, this is another one in Iowa, that this used to be the old schoolhouse. They jacked up the ceiling. They put another floor on it. And they put that outcropping to the right, and they turned the schoolhouse into a home. And up in Maine, this used to be the Hutchins School. And that, I believe, is in Kennebunk, Maine. Or they turned it into a pizza parlor, unfortunately. Or you can go to a for-profit museum. If you've been to St. Augustine, Florida, you can go to the oldest wooden schoolhouse in America. But unfortunately, this is a little hokey because they've got these talking dummies inside the school. And this is not exactly what we're looking for in, restoration of schoolhouses, but it's for-profit, so you can go in and hear the little dummies talking. They have recordings, little dummies. And of course, here's a wine shop that used to be a schoolhouse, and a firehouse that used to be a schoolhouse. They've added on to it and made it into the local firehouse, or a decorator's shop. So you can see some of the fate of some of the schoolhouses in the country. And some have actually been turned into bed and breakfasts around the country. And you can actually go stay there and stay there like a hotel. But unfortunately, many of them sit by the side of the road, the ragged beggars sleeping. And this one has been resurrected. I want you to know that this is under the care of a group now, a civic group that has taken this school under its wing, and they are now refurbishing this schoolhouse. So the next time I give a talk, they may be through the preservation. And another one in Iowa that's kind of beyond repair. Some of them have truly sat there so long that they are beyond repair. So what is the fate of schools? What is their future, actually? Well, they are being moved and they are being preserved, and it's a very expensive affair. I have friends in Indiana who have a group that they have resurrected a schoolhouse, and it's costing them over $200,000 to restore and bring that schoolhouse up to code just so that they can have groups visiting. Schoolhouses have been moved. My friends in Boonesboro, Indiana, moved this schoolhouse across an interstate highway. Because it was too heavy to go up over the overpass, they had to cross directly across. And you can see the next picture where they're holding up traffic. This is a very old picture. She only had it from 1998, but you'll be happy to see the school as it is today. And they said that the truckers on the CBs in those days, the CBs were saying, "You will not believe what's crossing the road." And certainly they have refurbished the schoolhouse. They put it on the grounds of an elementary school, and children do come for a 4th grade program here, and they have school marms, and it's a lovely program. And so even individuals move schoolhouses. This one has been adopted by a young couple in Kansas, and you can see her down on the bottom on the horse after they moved the schoolhouse. They have painted it, they're working on the inside, and they work on it as much. They're farmers in real time, and they're trying to refurbish the school in part-time. And they recently moved a 2-room school in this is Indiana. This is Waynesboro, I believe. And they haven't decided what they're going to do with that one yet. But our ideal, the ideal is to recreate it so that groups can come back and re-experience the one-room schoolhouse life, just for a couple of hours even. And so let's look just a little bit at their history. In Nashua in particular, the first schoolhouse was actually held inside the Searles house on Searles Road in Nashua. And now I'm not familiar where this house is, and I'm still looking for it, but they say that this house still exists in Nashua. Of course, it doesn't look like it used to, but that the first classes were actually held in what they were called, they were just called homeschooling in those days. They were called dame schools. And some little lady from the community would take on the children, maybe for a small fee, and she would teach them their letters, and they would read from the Bible, and they would learn some ciphering. But they would do it right in the keeping room. But the first classes in Nashua actually took place, I understand from reading, in that Searles house. And this poor beleaguered farmer looks like they're getting the best of him, I'll tell you. Anyway, why did they build one-room schoolhouses, and what was the importance of the one-room schoolhouse? When they started building common schools, that means public schools, free public schools for all children, these were the reasons they wanted to build them. To ensure that there would be a democratic nation that could fend off its enemies. Don't forget, we're just coming off the Revolutionary War. They wanted to instill in the children patriotism, a common English language, and to have unity in this country so that they would never have to go through a revolutionary war again, any kind of a war. They wanted the country cohesive. And so they pushed for the building of public schools even after the revolution. However, people were trying to rebuild their lives after the Revolutionary War, so the building of schoolhouses was put off a little bit. That's why they used the dame schools. But they eventually wanted children who went to common schools, public schools, to be proud to be Americans, and particularly learn the English language. And they would eventually become informed voters. Now, it's interesting to note, like it says here, that the education was never mentioned in the Constitution of the United States. And the reason for that is they wanted to leave it up to the states to control education. They did not want the federal government getting involved in public education, and they trusted the states to do a good job. And up until the 60s, that worked fine. And now you can see where we've headed up to today, okay? And that's why, as you go around the country and you see the different one-room schoolhouses, that's why you see a difference in the building styles. And they made their own rules about hiring teachers and what their qualifications or what the teaching materials and books would be, and the length of the school year or what was going to be in the schoolhouse, the curriculum, the regulations were all left up to local government. And they did a good job of it. And children do not leave one-room schoolhouses illiterate. And these are some of the subjects they taught in a one-room schoolhouse. Very, very basic, but you can see in red moral education and discipline. And we'll be talking a little bit about that. And who were the people that lobbied for free public schools? You always hear Horace Mann was the father of education when you were studying history in high school. Father of education. And why? Because he made countless speeches around this country, wrote numerous essays, and for decades talked about the improvement of one-room schoolhouse, any schools. And you can see what he supported. And he campaigned in lengthy essays against absenteeism and poor teachers and bad schoolhouses and substandard materials. He wanted to bring them up to a level of proficiency. And then a very interesting story, one of the later supporters of one-room school education and free publication was a man named Julius Rosenwald. Have you ever heard of him? He was the co-founder of Sears Roebuck. Believe it or not. He went into business with a man named Mr. Sears. They opened Sears Roebuck, got very, very rich on Sears Roebuck. Mr. Rosenwald was very, very grateful to his black patrons because if you think back before civil rights, black communities, the people of black communities were not allowed to shop in white stores. And much of Mr. Sears Roebuck's business was mail order. And so the black people of the South and the Midwest did a lot of their ordering through mail order. It was delivered right to their home. Mr. Rosenwald was forever grateful. Mr. Rosenwald went to these black communities and he said, if you will come up with half the money to build a schoolhouse, I will give you the other half. He built almost 5,000 new schools. He also built 217 homes for teachers. He spent $28 million to serve over 600,000 students in 15 states of the United States. He built 4,000 school libraries and employed 14,000 teachers, mainly in black communities, and they are called Rosenwald schools. And he had 3 or 4 different designs that the community could pick out and choose, which would fit your community. And it was cheap. They didn't have to keep reinventing the wheel. And so he came up with all this money. And he's a Jewish philanthropist who put his money where his mouth was and thanked the people of the South in their communities. And the schoolhouse that you saw was the schoolhouse that he wanted to avoid. When I show you this log schoolhouse, he took anyone who had a schoolhouse that was logs didn't have to go to a log schoolhouse anymore after Mr. Rosenwald gave his donations, because they built new schools for them. Okay, why one room? Why only one room in these schoolhouses? Whoops, sorry, technology's great. The populations were small. Oh, here we go. The school had to be within walking distance, because when they were built, they didn't bus them. And generally, they were within 2 miles. If you go out to the Midwest, no child had to walk more than 2 miles to a school. And when the country was expanding and they came up with the Northwest Ordinance, the federal government actually demanded that part of the money from the sale of the Northwest Ordinance land went to building schools. And that's why there is a plethora of schools in the Midwest. Every 2 miles they would build a one-room schoolhouse as population needed it. The number of school-age children at the time would only fill one room. And the district usually could only afford 1 teacher, and they were all in the same room, grades K through 8. And these one-room schools were used for all kinds of things. They were the community center and the meeting hall and the Grange Hall. They were built of the cheapest local material, as you've seen in the pictures. They had usually that central stove that heated the whole room, because it had this great exhaust pipe that went all the way to the back of the schoolhouse, and heat would come out of that. Multiple windows for ultimate light, and they would have slate blackboards. Playgrounds and sanitary facilities were often non-existent, and some schoolhouses did not have privies. And that was something that they really had to get on these school districts to get for cleanliness and privacy, because the kids would go off into the woods or off into a cornfield, and it was totally unsanitary. And generally, they were staffed by teachers not much older than the students, very often who were 8th grade graduates themselves, hired locally to teach the children. And so here are our nostalgic recreations. Here are some of the interiors of the schoolhouses around the country. If you go to Maine, you can see the very earliest and oldest schoolhouse up in York, Maine. And the children actually did sit on those benches. And of course, then they started building wooden benches. This is the inside of the Redstone School at the Wayside Inn. And so they started to get a little more comfortable. And this one is the Tucker Mountain School, and all of this is original to 1837. So you can get an idea of what it was like. They still have to find a pipe for the stove, but this is, and the floor slants to the middle, and they haven't figured out why the floor slants like a V to the middle on both sides. So these are some, and this is the interior of the District Number 1 schoolhouse, and it was refurbished in 1976. By the Benevolent Association of the Daughters of the King, which is a local benevolent association that's been around since 1896. And so they have an endowment, and they keep this school open, and they pay for the 4th grade buses and, you know, for this field trip so that all 4th graders can come in. This one is in Westford, Massachusetts, the Parkerville Number 5 schoolhouse. But around the country, you can see how groups have painstakingly recreated. They've sometimes scoured the territory for desks that they can put inside these schoolhouses. And I say a nostalgic recreation. Some of them are not exact, but they're trying to make it look like they did in the past. So around the country, these are some of the interiors of the schoolhouses. And desks are becoming very hard to find because there are so many schools refurbishing and vying for the same equipment. But you can see that they've done a good job, and some of these are original too. This is a black schoolhouse in Oklahoma. It was not a Rosenwald school, but it was a black schoolhouse. It was eventually replaced by a Rosenwald school, but you can see that it's a plank schoolhouse. And the recitation bench was where the teacher, this big bench in the front, was where the teacher would teach each of the classes, each of the levels, each day. She taught every grade, every subject, every level, every age, and she could have 40 or 50 different lessons in a day. And they've done beautiful recreations. This one's in Texas. And this one has a Dutch influence, and this one is in New Jersey. And that's Iowa. So the realities faced by teachers. The age of the teachers in these one-room schoolhouses was very, very young. I'm an old school mom. I can only depict a widow who came back to teach, you see. But most teachers in those days were 17 or 18 years old and taught for a very short time. Not many of them made it into a career because you were expected to leave teaching if you got married. Their education and experience was minimal. They didn't even open normal schools to teach teachers until 1839. Lexington, Massachusetts was the first of the normal schools, and they opened Fall River and Bridgewater, and eventually Lowell, Salem. They started to come up with schools that taught just teachers. The pay was very, very low, and I'll show you a chart in a minute. The condition of the schools varied, but if you read the old records, the early schools were not in very good condition. The attendance of the scholars was abysmal because they would very often have 50% absenteeism because not only sickness, but because they had to work on the farms. And they had no job security, and the longevity in the job was only as long as the school committee man having a niece who needed the job. So political pull was rampant. The living conditions were that they generally boarded with sometimes the families in the district, sometimes they boarded with someone who had an extra room in their house, and the school board would pay their room and board. Very, very rarely did they have something called a teacherage, which was a little room attached to the schoolhouse, which served as the teacher's bedroom and living area. And it was just a little tiny room with a little stove, but very few places could afford a teacherage. Like I said, young. This was just one paragraph. I not only taught, but I was an administrator, mother, doctor, nurse, judge, jury, artist, cook, librarian, custodian, or janitor, carpenter, or fixer, advisor, psychologist, disciplinarian, and humanitarian. I might say that I was a jack of all trades and a master of none. In this rural community, I was very close to the children and all of the parents and many others in the area. Their problems became my problems, which sometimes made my task even harder. So that kind of sums up what a one-room schoolhouse teacher was expected. And this is an 1842 record, 1841, of the District No. 1 schoolhouse. All 11 districts are actually on this list, but I particularly want you to look at No. 1. Miss Bancroft taught the summer school in that year. She made $9.92 a month. Mr. Kendall, Mr. Rodney Kendall, taught in the winter session at that schoolhouse and made $27 a month. And and that's the same groan that we get out of the children when they come into the classroom and we show them this chart in the classroom. And it's very characteristic. You can go down to Miss Wright teaching the summer session for $11.12, but Mr. Philbrick made $24 a month. And it took them decades to get past that inequality in teacher salary. So with the opening of the West, schoolhouse construction reached an all-time high through 1900. And this scene, as the ones I'm going to show you coming along, will be repeated. This is a very famous painting called "Across the Continent, Westward the Course of Empire Takes Its Way." And if you notice right in the very center of this picture, down the bottom, is the schoolhouse. And that is to show you that with the expansion of this country, one of the central buildings that all the communities wanted to build first was the schoolhouse. As the railroad went, so did the schoolhouse. And I think that's the longest title I've ever seen for a painting, but that's the title of the painting. And this scene will be repeated across the United States so that we had 220,000 of them. And this is up in Farmington, New Hampshire, and you can see the children are barefoot because they did not want to ruin their good shoes. And across the country, the ubiquitous group, even a sod schoolhouse. Look at the size of some of the classes, huh? And a black schoolhouse. They were very proud to pose in front of their schoolhouses. Yes?
How long did the school season last? Was it year-round?
Well, no, it wasn't. Actually, that's a very good question. They had about 11 or 12 weeks in the summer and about 11 or 12 weeks in the winter. And you're probably going to say, why summer and winter? Because they had to work around the farming schedule. And we're still on some kind of a farming schedule, I think, that we... But anyway, and even then, they had fewer than 100 days of school each year. And as I said, the attendance was abysmal. And even in that chart, you could see the record of attendance for the schoolhouse. But here's the, this I took just a couple of weeks ago before the big one fell. And, but it sits quietly during the winter. And these are just some of my views. But what is our program like? What are we trying to accomplish in our schoolhouse? Like I said, it was restored by the Daughters of the King in 1976. And we maintain the program right through today. The inside of the schoolhouse. And I've been, since I've been the school marm, I have been shopping everywhere I can go into an antique store and find artifacts to put in the schoolhouse. My husband said, first job I spent more than I made doing the job. So, and it all goes into the schoolhouse, and we're happy to do it. And who were the people that ran these district schools? In Nashua, there were 3 to 5 elected officials, and this is what they did. They oversaw the distribution of the money to the schoolhouses. They would visit and inspect the schools twice a year. They would encourage better attendance. They would see to proper books. And they presented annually a written report on each of the schools to the town. They would come in and they would hear the children at the end of the year examination. And they would have to, the children would have to perform for these people, and then they would write these reports on, based on how well the children did in their recitations. But below that superintending school committee of 3 to 5 men, there was a district school committee also called Prudential School Committee, and they were on the very district level. And they would, like it says here, guard the expenditures, hire the teachers for their school. They would keep the records. And women were not allowed to serve on these committees until the 1870s. And even though they're the ones that did the hiring of the teachers. Now, we are so fortunate that we have the actual original Dunstable records from when this, our District #1 schoolhouse was, there was an original one that was built way before the 1841, and they've got these records dating back from 1809 up to the 1870s in one book. This book was passed on for 60 years, and it sits in the Nashua Historical Society archives. And so they allowed me to scan some of these pages so you could see how they kept the records of the school. And these pages right here, which are very difficult to read, are the pages in which they decided to scrap the old schoolhouse and build the one that's sitting there now in 1841. They had to come to a decision: do we repair the old one or do we build a new one? And that's when they started to get themselves together and decided to build a new one, because the records actually say in 1840 the schoolhouse is in great need of repair. There has been considerable irregularity of attendance from cold. There was an unusual coughing at examination, and it is hoped that the district, before next winter, will employ a carpenter and thus save the expense of a physician and increase the usefulness of the teacher. They were very frugal. So they said, repair that schoolhouse so these children won't be out with sickness. Well, they decided to build a new one. And the next record says, we voluntarily expend liberal sums for the erection of churches and private dwellings, but we don't want to spend anything on a comfortable schoolhouse. Our horses and cattle are housed or sheltered according to the season, but the comfort of our children, 6 hours in the day during the coldest portions of the year, is often and most unwisely and inhumanely neglected. And so the people of District 1 were on a guilt trip, and so they built their schoolhouse. This was an Ingalls photo from the 1800s. And then in 1842, they reported that, yes, indeed, the people of the District Number 1 built their schoolhouse. They've aroused themselves and set themselves an example worthy of the rank they hold as number 1. They have built one of the best schoolhouses in town. It is of brick, convenient in its interior arrangement, admirably located with liberal grounds appended, and provision has been made to adorn the area with verdure and shrubbery. And this cost is only about 1% on the taxable property in the district. And today, I guess it's somewhere about 66%. Yes, is it 66%? Thank you. And so this is what they built. Isn't that beautiful? This is my favorite picture of all. Unfortunately, CVS is over here, Walgreens is over here, and CVS is across the street. But it used to look like that at one time. And so here are some of the, just quickly, I'll show you some of the other one-room schoolhouses in Nashua. The Edgeville or Burke Street School. They did have different styles. The City Farm or Country Club School. Some people called it different names. This is today as a house. And someday Frank Mooney is going to take me up there and show me where that house is. Right, Frank Mooney? Thank you. Okay. And then we have the Coburn Avenue School. And Frank knows a lot about schools in Nashua. And he gave me many of these pictures from his own album so that I could scan them and put them in this presentation. And the Mulberry Street School. The Dunstable Road or the Silver Spring School. Sometimes they were known by different local names. The North Hollis Road School. The East Pearl Street School. The Groton Road School, the first school, and there was a second one built, and this was the second one built on that particular property. The Old Palm Street, and the reason I'm going to show you the Old Palm and the New Palm is to show you how when they demolished a small school, they built a bigger one. And this became the New Palm Street School. So, I mean, I could show pictures of bigger schools, but I'm going to forego that because this is about one-room schools. So here's our program at the District Number 1 Schoolhouse. And this is my colleague, Jean Paul, who switches days with me. Two of us teach these classes. The fourth graders from all the fourth grades in Nashua and surrounding towns come in for a 2-hour historical recreation of a one-room schoolhouse experience where they write with dip pens and we do recitations and we read from reproduction readers and they write on slates. And we talk about all of these things with them. We either talk about them or they experience them in this 2-hour program. We can squeeze a lot in. This program has been going on since 1978. And the children of Nashua are now grown who've been there. Yes?
Does it include a paddle?
Oh, does it include a paddle? Oh, yes. We even have brought a paddle. Oh, yes. And this one has a good snap to it because it's cut up the middle. Oh, yes, we show them paddles. We make them assume the position. Yes. And so we go over all of this. And this is John Tyler. We even show them who John Tyler was. John Tyler was the president from 1841 to 1844. It wasn't the most interesting time in history, but just to show you the children's view of the classroom. And the teacher's desk, and we use that for a paddle too. It's an old washing stick. Yes?
I'm just curious, like, where they had, like, grades 1 through 8, how did one teacher, like, say, if you're teaching the first grade, and then you're teaching the 8th grade,
She would-
how do they keep them concentrated on what they're
She's asking how did the teacher manipulate the classes and the ages. She would call one grade up at a time. They would sit in the recitation bench in the front of the room, and the rest of the children were assigned busy work, and that's what they called it, busy work. I mean, we can't even fathom calling it busy work today, but they did and those children were expected to be quiet until it was their time to get called up twice a day. And so the older children had to help out with the younger ones. Okay, some of these things are in the classroom, so you can see that we are trying to recreate it. They use dip ink pens. We ring them in with a bell. We make them line up at separate doors. We have some artifacts, slates. They write on slates. We show them and tell them what the lunches were like in those days and what they carried the lunches to school in. We show them the toys of the time, some of which have not changed since then. We've got it set up just like a day in a classroom. We take them out to the cemetery at the end of the day, at the end of the 2 hours, and we do a grave rubbing with them, and we talk about some of the famous people that are in the cemetery. And there's hers truly, teaching in the classroom. Boys on one side, girls on the other. And they enjoy, they will walk out of this saying, this is the best field trip I've ever been on. And it's worth every penny the Benevolent Association pays, believe me. And we had a guy cutting the grass one day, and he said, I came here when I was in the 4th grade. It hasn't changed much. Good, that's what we're hoping for. And so this is, we light a fire on the coldest days with real logs. I start with a Duraflame, and then I put real logs in. They don't know it, though, because I'm shoving a real log in. And they do practice writing, and sometimes the classes dress up. And we do try to recreate a reading assignment where the teacher would line them up and read, and we do the same thing. And we have reproduction readers. And so this is just to show, and we have the dunce cap. And Jean Paul is demonstrating the dunce, and the children love when we get to the discipline, and they love when we get to the privies. This boy is being punished, making him sit on the girls' side and wear the pink bonnet, you see. And every time we do these, it's always a boy who loves doing this. I mean, you think, how can this be that we're so lucky? And so we tell them how the children were punished in the one-room schools, and we show them pictures, and we've got the hickory stick. And boy, oh boy, their eyes are all wide, and they can't believe that there was corporal punishment, or that you had to write 100 times, I've been a bad boy. And they're very, very interested in the privies. They're very interested in outhouses. They want to know what happens if they fill up. They want to know what they used for toilet paper. They want to know how long you could spend out there. And so we show them what it looked like. We don't have a privy. We did it one time, a 2-holer. So then we go to the cemetery, and we finish up our program out in the cemetery with a little bit of history. And this is the last class that ever graduated from the District No. 1 school. This was Miss Alice Smith, who married a man who had 6 children. And then they went on to have 6 children, and she had 12 children. She was the last teacher at the District No. 1 schoolhouse in 1921. And this young man on the left is Ambrose Dwyer, who was the last graduate of the District No. 1 schoolhouse. And so there's our recreation. And Jean Paul is saying goodbye. Off on the bus. And the end of the school day in 1841. Okay, so that's pretty much the program. Thank you. Yes?
been the best level to go in on the program?
What made, oh, they tried third grade, was much too young. Fourth grade, there's a great attention span. And they are interested in everything, everything. So, and then as they get older, they get less interested, I think. But the fourth graders, for some reason, turned out to be perfect. They're 10. Yes?
On the Nashua schoolhouses that you showed earlier, how many of those are still standing?
Mr. Mooney is going to help me with that. I think there are 3 or 4 of them that have been converted into homes that are still standing. But as a schoolhouse, only 1, the district number 1.
And have you seen the one in Hudson, New Hampshire?
I think it's derelict. Isn't it just sitting by the side of the road, though?
On Derry Road?
It's kind of yellow tan. Is it kind of yellow tan with
yeah,
brown?
on
Yes.
Derry Road. I was
Yes.
wondering if you had seen that
Now,
one.
someone has to get in there and refurbish it. No?
It's privately owned. It went through a refurbishment a few years ago between the property owner and the Junior Women's Club of Hudson. And when the town of Hudson's fourth graders do their tour, they go into that school. It's called a
They
number.
still do that?
Oh, yes.
I was told it was not used. I was
No,
heartbroken.
well, I'm sorry, it's not used as a schoolroom.
But they have visitors?
They have visitors
I'm
when,
glad to hear it.
when the fourth graders and the third graders in Hudson do their historical tour. That's one of the spots on their itinerary.
That makes me very happy because I was told otherwise.
It's
Good.
owned by the Jasper family.
That's wonderful news. I was told wrong information about, and someone sent me the picture of that schoolhouse and said it's,
Whatever, I don't know what you were told, but
they told me that it just sat there doing nothing. I was heartbroken.
How many classes do they normally have in one schoolhouse?
In the earlier days, how many classes?
Back when I went, was it 3 or 4 grades?
Well,
I don't remember.
in most of the towns, it was kindergarten through 8th grade. And that teacher taught kindergarten through 8th grade. And then eventually, as populations got bigger, they could narrow it down.
Yeah, I
And
think when I went,
yes.
There was only 3 or 4.
Yes, and then they took the other people and sent them to graded schools as populations grew. Last questions? One more question. We've got time here.
Well, I was just going to mention one thing. In many of these small towns about the school teacher, the school marms, they had to be of good moral character as well.
Oh,
They were
yes.
expected to show up at church every Sunday, and they weren't allowed to date. So that might be something.
Or dance.
Or dance.
Or dance. There were all kinds of rules and regulations, and so many of these things are presentations in themselves. The life of the teacher or the current life of a schoolhouse, and yet we squeezed a lot into an hour. We do have another presentation coming in here, but I appreciate you coming. Thank you very much. I appreciate your interest. I loved it.